I'm honoring the one whose dominion is everlasting and his kingdom is from generation to generation. But then he says, all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say unto him, what God are you doing? It doesn't mean that you cannot question God, but it simply means that you will probably never understand why God does what he does, why he allows what he allows, and why he doesn't stop what we know he has the power to stop. I submit this to you. He behaves in such a fashion because he is sovereign. And so when we consider further even this theme, we understand that God is subject to nobody. He doesn't have to obey anybody. He doesn't take commands or instructions from anyone. He is influenced by no one. And I know that we think that when we pray, we push God. But what you have to understand is oftentimes our prayers are simply consistent with what God has willed all the time. And so when we understand something about the sovereignty of God, we recognize that he alone is absolutely independent. He has formed us for family, but guess what? If you decide you don't want to be a part of his family, he is still going to be God. Look at somebody near you and tell him he loves you and he wants you, but just in case you trip and lose your mind, he's not going to stop being God because you decided to stop being family. And so we understand then that because of God's sovereign nature, he does as he pleases, he does it the way he pleases, and he does it in the timing in which he pleases. Anybody understand that part about God? You've asked God for something and you didn't get it. You asked God to heal somebody and he didn't do it. You asked God to make a way and it didn't open. You asked him to shut something down and it was still wide open. You found out that God does what he wants to. You thought you needed something by Monday and it showed up on Thursday. You recognize that God does what he wants to. You know, he just acts like us. Don't we do what we want to? Look at your neighbor, tell him you got that from God. We pretty much will make up our mind to do what we want to. We do it when we want to. We do it the way we want to. Where do you think you got that from? Something of his sovereign nature exists in you. Look at your neighbor, tell him you a royal child. You a royal child. I'm telling you, you're a royal child. The Bible tells us he doeth according to his will. He does what he wants to the way he wants to. As a matter of fact, when we consider this sovereign nature of God, we understand that it was at God's pleasure that the Red Sea was divided and the water stood up as walls. We understand that it was at God's pleasure that when the sons of Korah decided they wanted to rise up against Moses, that God opened up the earth and swallowed all of them up. Look at somebody near you and tell them he is sovereign. And so when God ordered, the sun stood still, and on another occasion he caused the sun to retract, to go back 10 degrees. Why? Because it wanted to. Look at your neighbor, tell him he's able. And when you understand that God is able, your prayers begin to change, your expectations begin to change, your hopes begin to change. It is then that you begin to understand that there is nothing impossible with God, but instead that all things are possible to them that believe. We found out that God in his sovereignty allowed ravens to carry food to Elijah. We found out that in his sovereignty, God alone allowed iron to swim on top of the water. I dare you to go out there and take an axe head and throw it on top of the water and see if it will float. Look at your neighbor, tell him God is sovereign. But in his sovereign nature, we understand that it was God who allowed lions to become instantly tamed when Daniel was in the den. In his sovereign nature, it was God who allowed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to not even smell like smoke, to not have a hair on their head singed when they were in the fiery furnace. And so we understand that because of God's sovereign nature, he handles things differently from the way we might handle things. And it is